Thank you everyone for being here today. Welcome to the second episode of Field to Future video podcast. These quarterly discussions explore topics at the intersection of ag and environmental sciences, land and resource management, as well as tech and innovation. These conversations also dig deeply into industry impacts, challenges, and various opportunities. I am your host, Leticia Hernandez, and I work for the Center for Land-Based Learning as the farm's alumni and internship manager. I will be facilitating this conversation today. And to answer our icebreaker question about whether or if agave had a spirit animal, what would it be? I chose a Costa's hummingbird, which is a desert hummingbird native to California. And it's a beautiful bird. If you've never heard of it, go check it out. It's purple and gorgeous. And most hummingbirds are very protective. And I see agave as being very protective with its spines and spikes. So I am going to introduce our guest. I am honored to be joined today with two amazing speakers, Craig Reynolds, the founding director of California Agave Council and a longtime advocate for sustainable agriculture and water policy. Craig has been at the forefront of bringing agave to California, helping spark a whole new frontier for climate-resilient farming. I am equally excited to welcome our second guest, Dr. Ron Runnebaum, Associate Professor at UC Davis, UC Davis with a joint appointment in Viticulture Enology and Chemical Engineering. Ron's research focuses on sustainable resource use in winemaking and distilled beverages. I will turn it over to Craig and Ron. Would you mind introducing yourselves and sharing a bit about how your journey came to be with agave? And if you can also answer our icebreaker question, that would be great.
Well, sure. I'll start with the icebreaker. And welcome everybody. Great to see so much interest. Well, I chose the iguana because it does well. Number one, it's a very prehistoric animal for millennia, like agave. It's been around virtually unchanged for millions of years and survives in extreme conditions, but also in very a wide variety of conditions. There are iguanas in the desert, but also in subtropical regions as agave as well, and native to the Southwest and to Mexico and Central America, like agave. So that's why I picked the iguana. Love it. And it comes in many species, adaptable to the various regions where they survived. Oh, and about me. So my journey, agave, began really 19 years ago when I was volunteering for, and still do, for Project Amigo down in Colima, Mexico, where the founder and I decided that we would try growing agave to make a spirit, to make tequila to sell to our volunteers to help raise money for our project. And the project is to provide educational support to the rural poor children in the state of Colima, in the rural area there, and to keep them in school and ultimately go to college, which we successfully have done for over 35 years. And one of our guests, Sandy Osborne, has been down there and seen the work of Project Amigo. But anyway, so I began there by growing agave, a small 4-acre plot. And I was working in the state legislature at the time on representing, my boss, Senator Lois Wolk, represented the Delta region, which was the heart of the debate about the Delta Tunnels Project, which was to help move water from the Delta in Northern California down to the San Joaquin Valley, where they were having, and do still have, water shortages. And it occurred to me that one of the solutions, maybe instead of the tunnels, would be for the farmers down there to grow a more appropriate crop that required less water, and that maybe agave could be that crop, or one of the crops. And so I talked to then Professor Roger Bolton at UC Davis, who was Ron's predecessor in the at the Mondavi Center and teaching distilled spirits, and Professor Bolton had experience with agave and had been a consultant to Patron. And I asked Roger, was that a stupid idea or not? And he said it was not particularly stupid. You should give it a try. So I got 500 agave plants 10 years ago in 2014 and planted them outside of Woodland. And it turned out they did very well. And we started producing small batches of agave for craft distillers that made a wonderful product. And fast forward to, I started providing rhizomes to other growers, including my partner, Raul Chavez, who's a farm manager in Woodland and actually planted the agaves, and he's the real grower, the true farmer. And his plants did very well. And so more and more people started growing agave in our region. Meanwhile, this was also happening in Santa Barbara region, Central Coast. A fellow named Doug Richardson, who had a nursery, was selling agaves to people. And so it wasn't just me. There were other folks. And then finally in 2022, Professor Ron suggested that maybe we should get some of these distillers together and start talking about your challenges in distilling agave. And I said, that's a great idea. Have a symposium. And I said, well, let's invite the growers too. So we had our first symposium of about 40 people over at the Mondavi Food and Wine Institute. And then we got 15 of those folks together and formed our trade association called the California Agave Council. And that was to further our mission and to sponsor legislation to create a quality standard for California agave spirits, which we sponsored legislation and did successfully that year, that says if you use the words California agave and spirits on your label, it must be made from 100% California grown agave with no additives for flavor or coloring. That was the entire bill. And we thought that was the highest possible quality standard. And it was important for California to establish that from the start of the industry. So that's how we can talk further what we've done since. And that's sort of apologize for the length of the intro, but that's my pathway to agave. I have since retired from the legislature and now spend a lot of my time just to further the California agave industry.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Runnebaum. As was mentioned, I'm a faculty member at UC Davis in Viticulture Enology, as well as in chemical engineering. And I guess I would choose as a spirit animal a porcupine, just because it's spiky and have to probably work with it carefully. So how I got involved with California agave, it really starts with Craig Reynolds. So after he had planted those agaves, probably one of the obvious outcomes or outlets for that would be to make distilled spirits from that. And so my now retired colleague Roger Bolton was transitioning the course on distilled beverage technology. Shortly after I had arrived at UC Davis, our department has a long history in distilled spirits dating back to 1880 when our department was formed. And so got to know Craig through that quarter, and then just continue to stay in touch periodically. And then things kind of became a little bit more pressing, I would say. I think in 2019, Craig, you were harvesting some of your initial agaves. I think there was the agave cook in Woodland or outside of Winters. And I think, and so again, it was this question of, what role can UC Davis play in this? And so one of those initial things that we could do in the absence of funding to work on this crop was to bring people together. So, at the Runnebaum Institute for Wine and Food Science, we have a space available for convening not groups that are not too large. We've had to move out into the conference center more recently, but for that initial meeting, we were able to bring growers and distillers together. It was really amazing. Even with my work on wine, we host things on campus. And something that was kind of unique in this instance is that even in that first meeting, there was a lot of interest from individuals throughout the state. We had people coming in from San Diego County, Mono County, Lake County, and so throughout the state, which was very exciting to see. And so I've continued to work on that and work to bring together more faculty on campus. A lot of that is really just getting out and meeting emerging growers and distillers and learning more about what's on their mind, what are the challenges that they're seeking. And then, kind of a first step is there somebody on campus that might be able to help with that? And are they interested at some point in coming on board?
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your guys' background. I truly appreciate that. I know the California Agave Council was started in 2022, but what did agave look like pre-2022? You did touch a little bit on that, but can you share acreage? What are the varietals that they're growing? A little bit more on the farming side.
Yeah, not a whole lot known about what was going on before then because there was no group assembling information. However, I did know, as I mentioned, Doug Richardson, who was really a real pioneer down in Santa Barbara. Drylands farming is his business. He had been selling agaves to various folks around the area, and so that's been going on, and a wide variety, but none of them had been maturing and been taken to the process of distillation until 2015, when we did our first cook of agaves from Riverside, as well as Ventura Spirits did their cook of agave grown down in Santa Barbara at the La Paloma Ranch. So in the meantime, a number of people have been growing. We don't have document a real solid idea, but I think I would estimate it at being less than 20 acres, frankly, prior to for commercial purposes, not landscaping, prior to 2022, and so not a whole. Now, if you really before that, to really get to before that, agave is native to California, particularly in Southern California, and there were tribes like the Kumeyaay and Cahuilla tribes that used agave for food for probably thousands of years, as throughout Mexico and where agave has been part of the pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican diet, cooked agave.
Perfect. Ron, before we go, or excuse me, Craig, before we move on, can you share a little bit more when you say cooked, a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. Well, agave in its raw form is not edible or fermentable or distillable. Fermented, then distilled. So, but when the inulin and carbohydrates convert to a really sweet sugar after it's cooked, whether in a pit, which it was done in pre-Hispanic for food, and a serious, significant source of carbohydrate for native people in the Nahuatl civilization and others. So it's that cooking process that makes the agave available as a food for humans or spirit, either way.
Thank you. And Ron, I know you touched a little bit about the distilled beverage technology and how things got started. Can you share a little bit more about specifically around how you're working with agave in research? A little bit of that history.
Yeah, so I guess, right now it's really just been through chatting with a lot of the growers. There's definitely been some things that are on their mind as far as, viruses and, the genetics. So have brought in colleagues on campus that are doing this for other important crops for California. As well as just a lot of the agronomy aspects. What is the impact? Can we start quantifying the impact of agricultural inputs like water, like fertilizer, and other labor for things like, weed management and so forth. And so, again, the growers have been growing this in small amounts for the last decade here in California. But there really is an opportunity to start quantifying that and collecting data that can be shared. And I think we're really in a interesting time where we do have agaves that are being moved around the state. So the same clonal selection essentially grown in different environments. And so I think we can learn a lot about how different selections of agaves grow in different locations, what's working well, what's not. But we need to be kind of creating some sort of way for people to kind of trust that data, having some way of standardizing the collection of that data and sharing that. And so that's kind of where I think UC Davis can start to play a role.
And I might add that UC Davis already is playing a role, and that Ron's chief researcher on this, Paula Guzman Delgado, who has a lot of experience with other crops in California, olives and others, has been out in the field for the last 2 years throughout California doing a wide variety of measurements of water consumption and size, bricks, a wide variety of measurements throughout Santa Barbara and Sonoma County and Fresno County and Yolo County and Solano County. She's all over the place and she's got cameras installed and doing drones and measuring all the carbon and measuring a lot of things. I have no idea what she's measuring, to be honest. Taking a very uber science approach. And as well, Ron, you might mention that two things. When we formed our first symposium, Stuart Wolf and Lisa Wolf made their initial contribution to the UC Davis to begin agave research, the seed funding. And that's what has led to Paula out in the field. But subsequently, UC Davis got a grant from the Department of Agriculture to do more research into things such as viruses and genetics of viruses, and the council also got a grant from the Department of Ag, and we're doing a lot of things. Initially, doing a meta study of all the research that already exists, plenty of it in Mexico and as well as the United States and other countries. So we're trying to assemble all the research and summarize it and make it accessible to people so we can have one source of research data that's been going on for the last decade or so.
Thank you. That's actually a perfect segue. So thank you for sharing the history and a little bit about that. But, present day, it sounds like recently, actually, I read the newsletter for California Agave Council. If you're not on that newsletter, definitely get on it. And Stuart Wolf was saying, and I quote, "This momentum is especially important as we work to have agave recognized as a specialty crop, making it eligible for USDA programs like crop insurance and market access support." And so, and Stuart was just recounting an experience in DC in his newsletter, specifically shedding light on how our nation views agave currently. And so, can you share what is happening now that is contributing to this momentum? And then, Ron, if you can jump in about that CDFA research stuff after, that would be great.
Sure. Well, there's so much going on. It's really hard to really talk about it, briefly, but there's, I think we estimated, we think there's probably by the end of the summer will be 1,100 acres planted in agave throughout California, when you consider we started maybe 3 years ago with 40 and then maybe up to 500 in the last couple of years. And anyway, it's really taking hold, and it's driven I think primarily by interest for a climate resilient, drought tolerant crop. That's what's driving it. It's not the agave spirits or tequila market that's driving the issue in California for the most part, even though California is second only to Mexico as a country in consumption of tequila. So there is a market here, but the interest for California really comes from the our changing climate, and that's what sparked my interest. Now, we have a drought tolerant crop, and that's what sparked the interest of commercial ag folks in the Central Valley, in particular, the Wolf family, and the others in Fresno, Madera, Merced, Kern counties, San Joaquin, the breadbasket of California ag. And it's about significant water restrictions due to the climate, and groundwater pumping restrictions, and lesser delivery of water from Northern California to those regions in Southern California. All those combine to make demand for an alternative crop, because the other alternative is to grow nothing and to fallow the land. And the Public Policy Institute of California out of UC Berkeley has already estimated there could be as much as 800,000 acres fallowed in California due to drought and climate change in the next 10 years. So that's a huge amount of highly productive ag land. California pretty much has the most productive ag land in the world. And we are the breadbasket not only for our country, but for much of the world. So that's a big issue. And when it comes to water, what are we talking about? We're talking about great crops like almonds that take 40 to 50 inches, or 4 to 5 acre feet, 4.5 acre feet of water every year. Pistachios, a similar 48 inches of water. Wine grapes, 30 to 40 inches. Tomatoes, all in that 30 to 50 inches of water. Agave takes about 3 inches if it's irrigated. So that's a huge difference. Now in Mexico, it's dry land, it's dry farmed, because they have an inverse rainy season to us. So that's why their summers are wet, ours are dry. Their winters are dry, our winters are wet. So it's completely opposite rain cycle. So we do need to irrigate, but very little. So now I forgot your question. But that's what's driving the interest. And I'll throw in there's been a lot of press about this, and I think frankly it's because tequila makes good clickbait for the media, and so we have never put out a press release, for example, at the Agave Council. Yet we've had numerous stories, whether on national media, New York Times, CNN, you name it, CBS Saturday Morning. So there's a deal of press interest, and it's the combination of two, the interest in tequila and climate change, that I think sparked public interest. But in California, from the agriculture community, it's for the most part about water and temperature. So the limiting factor for growing agave primarily is winter cold, hard frost, and our winter cold temperatures in California are continuing to rise, which made it possible for me to grow agave in Yolo County, where we used to have pretty serious hard frost of below 20 degrees, but we haven't had one of those in more than a decade. So those combined of water, saving water, and increasing temperature, winter lows being warmer, and as the latitudes move further north. And that's happening all over the world, not just California.
Thank you. All right, Ron, if you want to share a little bit more about momentum in research, it sounds like you got some funding, but hopefully we'll get some federal funding.
Yeah, so yeah, the funding was from the USDA through the CDFA. And yeah, I mean, that has been challenging. Obviously, there's a lot of momentum, a lot of need. As I was mentioning earlier, questions about virus profiling, genetics. I mean, these are kind of aspects of agriculture that, we've now have experience with other crops. Like, these are important for us to understand, wine grapes and other, especially perennial crops. So, there's an opportunity for us to try to get ahead of this. The challenge is that, as was mentioned, is, that agave is not considered a crop. It wasn't considered or wasn't listed as a crop even by the CDFA until quite recently. And so, as we've been applying for funding from various funding agencies, there are some challenges that are facing us when it's reviewed by panels. Is this a crop or not? It's different if it's being used for landscaping only versus if it's being grown for some kind of agricultural purpose. And then I think also, these types of funding agencies are also looking at funding things that are related to existing crops. And so, right now there's not a lot of acres being harvested each year. And so trying to kind of get, kind of the whole story out, what the momentum is, what the opportunity is for California farmers and communities, and then also kind of what this need is. We don't necessarily want to wait until we're completely planted out and then realize, maybe there were certain selections that would have been helpful for people in certain regions, which is why we're very thankful for this initial support from the CDFA that's really enabling our team to get out and work with a handful of growers throughout the state, making these measurements that Craig was mentioning, taking selections of their plant material, looking initially at some of the virus profiling and genetic diversity across species. So we definitely, some of the growers are growing multiple species of agave. And again, this is kind of, having much more experience in wine grapes. This is not, I think, too different from when, various, growing regions were looking at what wine grapes to plant. They would plant out like 20 different varieties. And I will point out that, at least from a plant classification standpoint, we're looking at, generally different species of agave. And so this is a bit different from wine grapes. Most of the wine grapes that people are familiar with are all different varieties of one species, Vitis vinifera. So there is really an opportunity for a lot of genetic diversity that down the road, once we learn more about this, we can start working with faculty with expertise in genetics for really making certain selections, or maybe even other ways of, kind of coming up with selections that are tailored for the growing conditions within California. But we really need to have that quantitative growth data, what's the sugar content, what's the yield, and then again, looking for what are the other uses for this. And so I think farmers are interested in the agave spirits because it's a high profit product that can help them pay for these initial expenses that are always much more expensive when you're starting up, right? And so that's great, but definitely I've been applying for grants with other agencies throughout the United States that are looking, at potentially using other aspects or the agave for other things like fuels or chemicals or biomaterials, all of these types of things. But again, sometimes those types of proposals are going to take a little longer to get people on board, whereas I think it's maybe a bit more straightforward because of all of the press, especially related to agave spirits, to say, oh, this is believable, right? This is a scalable industry that already exists, at least somewhere else.
And I should say, this might be a time to characterize who are the California agave growers. It's a very diverse group of folks that are growing I would say most of them currently growing less than 10 acres, and some just 3 acres. And they're sort of the research labs, if you will, because they are the ones growing many varieties, which I refer to as the heirloom varieties, which are primarily used in mezcal production, because tequila is only one variety of the Tequilana Blue Weber, whereas mezcals and other agave spirits use other varieties. So there are growers throughout the state growing many other varieties. I'm primarily only growing one. I have some others, but commercially only one. So these folks are taking significant risk, if you will, and spending a lot of time and money on plants that may take 10 or 12 years to mature, not knowing whether they'll have anything at the end of any value. So they're really out there. And that's where the research is important. This is a very unprecedented situation where we have a crop that has virtually no history in California, whereas even with wine and olive oil and that are there have been people growing it for commercial purposes for a long time before it took off. But this is really going from zero to nothing. So we're relying a lot on what we know from the experience in Mexico. And we're fortunate actually to have in California many Mexican Americans who have experience as well in those regions. Particularly, the gentleman I work with is from the Tonaya region in Jalisco and learned agave when he was a child and has family. And California is, I like to remind people, has only been part of the United States 175 years, and we were Mexico before. And we also have a very large Mexican American population. 12 million Californians self-identify as Mexican American. That's 31% of our population. We're the most diverse culturally and racially state in the nation by far, and very connected to Mexico. And that's so we do rely on that, but we're very different. Not just the climate that I mentioned in terms of rain and but also the economics. Labor is very cheap in Mexico, as much as 10 times cheaper. California agriculture relies much more on mechanization for scale, but we do use a lot of labor as well. But the agave industry in Mexico uses a lot of manual labor. And so there are things when it comes down to it that we will need to innovate and to do differently, and as we're already doing. And some of the practices we do are really sort of a hybridization of traditional practices in Mexico and more different practices in California. So we're doing something unique. We're not replicating tequila or mezcal, but it is a challenge. I don't know. I just wanted to get a sense of that. There may be 100 growers, and they come from, and everyone has their own story. So I have my story and my interest, which is focused on climate change and trying to find an alternative. Other people have other ambitions and their own story. So everyone has a pretty unique story in California. that's involved in it, but it's very exciting. We all share one thing in common, that we all are very fond of agave and think it's a spectacular plant that has multiple attributes, and it's not just beautiful, it's also it has so many uses, and so we have a lot of common interest in but not everyone has the same ambitions.
Well, based on what you're familiar with, Craig, do you know if folks are sorry, I had a question in the chat here. If folks are using mixed crop practices in agave right now, and can you maybe mention a few of the varietals that are being planted?
Well, when you say mixed crop, I think you're talking about intercropping, which would be, no, I'm not aware of that. And there are some practices for that are what I would classify as in the regenerative agricultural practices that are of interest and being utilized, particularly cover cropping in between, which is something that we're doing, which is not done very often in the tequila world. And I'm referring to when you talk about commercial ag in Mexico, it is mostly tequila, which comprises 97% of the agave spirits market, whereas mezcal is 3%. And most of mezcal is produced out of Espadín variety, 90% of it. But the other percent, which is highly valued, are these other varieties that add more complexity of flavor and so on. So when I talk about the commercial ag to scale in California is going to look more like commercial tequila production than it is commercial artisanal mezcal production, which is extremely labor intensive and also relies a lot on wild agave, which we don't have. And but so that's your question related to what now? I forgot it again.
About intercropping and then also varietals.
Intercrop, yeah. So there's a lot of interest in regenerative practices, carbon using biochar, and I think one of the things California can do is perhaps better than Mexico is deal with the full cycle of agave, not from growing to distillation to waste treatment. A real environmental challenge with distillation of agave is the vinasse, which is the vinasse, and Ron can talk more about this, which is the wastewater that's created, and it's the proportion is something like 10 times for every gallon of tequila. There's 10 gallons of wastewater, and it's very toxic. And in Mexico, much of it ends up in rivers and streams and is not properly treated. Some of the larger operations do good wastewater treatment, but it's one of the areas we can do a better job. And I think also the fiber waste from which is the bagasos from the distillation, which is the crushed fiber that's left over after the juicing. There are different uses for that, whether it's for silage for animal feed or pulp for paper. There are various uses for that. There's also, I think, a lot of promise, and this is being shown in other countries, for agave as a biofuel, as a more environmentally beneficial biofuel than corn or sugarcane, where agave can be grown without irrigation in areas and not displacing a food crop like you do with corn. So, and I see Todd just mentioned agave sisal in Brazil, which, agave siciliana, and I'm getting all over the place here, but agave siciliana is was one of the treasures that the conquistadors, when they came to the Yucatan, brought back to Europe, because they used it to make the ropes for the galleons, because it was incredibly strong and resistant to salt water and sun, and in fact is more durable than polypropylene rope today. But it also is what makes sisal rugs, and people have sisal rugs. But it's no longer grown commercially in Mexico, but it is grown in Brazil and in Africa, in Kenya and Madagascar. So I'm getting all over the place, but agave, it can be utilized for a lot of things and uses, and it can also be a food, as I mentioned before, and made into a syrup at a low glycemic level syrup, sugar. But currently, the return on investment is clearly highest when it comes to producing spirits, and that's what's really driving the market.
The focus. Perfect. And Ron, if you can share a little bit more about about the different uses and a little bit about that water.
So a couple of things, as all of these opportunities kind of, emerge, I guess, in our discussions, there's one of the great places or one of the great reasons to have a lot of this activity at UC Davis is that there's usually faculty working on this. We've had departments in textiles and design and fashion, so participating in something, related to all of that in a couple of weeks. And I think I'm invited because of the connection with agave and the opportunity for agave fibers. There was a comment in the chat about innovation and harvesting. We have one of the top departments for agricultural engineering at UC Davis. And so I've already started chatting with some faculty there that, have used their research areas and skills, to develop a lot of automation in agriculture for strawberries and other crops. And so there's definitely interest there. It usually comes back to, well, how are we going to fund grad students and postdocs to collect the data, to analyze the data, to report out these types of things. But also mention that, we have had interest from other institutions throughout California, United States, we're looking to partner with, but I've also had interest in organizations in Mexico, various size companies, growing in processing agaves, as well as academic institutions. And again, I think, there's eagerness to see kind of some of this expertise and research in agriculture at UC Davis applied or extended, I guess, to a different crop. And so again, I'm not sure, so I think again, kind of there's interest in kind of helping beyond just California. And that also applied to things or questions related to sustainability. So our department has done a lot of work with respect to more sustainable, winemaking. We have a LEED Platinum facility where we focus a lot on water efficiency and energy efficiency. And I think, as Craig was mentioning, some of the distillers of agave, and again, I think this actually applies more broadly to almost any distiller, interested in better or kind of a more circular aspect of utilizing water. How can we use different sources of energy that have been historically used? And then again, kind of the different waste streams. So I think there's kind of a really nice match for a lot of these areas, and it's nice to have be able to kind of find many of these areas of expertise on campus. But if not, we're very happy to partner with others throughout California so that we can educate a broad range of future work, kind of workforce in this space, as well as those that might be looking to grow agave elsewhere in the United States or throughout the world.
Let me take an opportunity to chime in on Ron, but also to answer a couple of chat questions. On the mechanization question, which is also a question that Todd asked, we recently had a visit from the folks from Australia who have actually already built and are using a mechanical harvester that is amazing. It's in the patent stage. And the reason they are doing it, and they're beginning an agave industry in Australia for many of the same reasons. They have severe drought issues, and but they have even more higher labor costs than we do in California. Up to $32 an hour for farm labor. So they're doing everything possible in all their agricultural practices to use mechanization. So there is a lot of work going on in that, and I expect that ultimately, 10 years from now, if not sooner, much of California unscalable agave will be mechanically harvested. Just as UC Davis will probably have a role in it, as they did with the tomato harvester that completely revolutionized the tomato industry. Another question was that Isa Marie asked about, are we engaging with traditional Mexican producers? And yes, we are. And Ron mentioned that in terms of also collaborating with the academic community. The support, and I think it might surprise some folks that you would expect that the Mexican agave industry folks would be disturbed or concerned, but it's been tremendously supportive, and we've had visits from growers and so on, and the people that have helped me in doing our artisanal cooks is a mezcalero, several mezcaleros from Mexico, and some of them live here and go back and forth and have a mezcal brand in Mexico, but also live in California. So the agave community between the U.S. and Mexico is actually quite collaborative, I would say. It's been our experience. Not only with the people who live here and so many of our members. And in fact, one of our new board members, Edgar Cervantes, comes from a family in Jalisco that has a tequila brand in Mexico, and they are now growing agave in the San Joaquin and want to create a California agave spirit brand here. I should say the other thing, other than climate change and drought, that's driving, and I think is part of the future of why California agave spirits will be has a future, is interest in California, but worldwide, in food grown closer to home, what we call the farm to food, farm to fork, and farm to glass. People are much more aware of the cost and the climate cost of transporting food around the world, and containers and trucks, and the consumption of carbon to move the whether it's tequila or mezcal from Mexico to here. Well, it's not the same product, but if you really want agave spirits, you might want to consider something that's grown closer to home. Not just agave spirits, but if I have a parting, message to folks, is regardless of what you eat or drink, at least put in your thought, where did it come from? And is it possible, is there a local alternative that's more sustainable for the planet? And that's I think that there is a significant appetite for that in California, in particular. Sacramento, we like to call ourselves the farm to fork capital of the world, and I think with good reason.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit too on the future, and that's exactly what we want to touch on as we wind down this discussion. And Ron, if you can share with us how you see the future of the agave industry in California.
Yeah, I mean, at least from talking with growers, I seems like there should be a strong reason why this could be a part of the portfolio of many farmers and communities in California. I think that's one thing that's kind of exciting about this as a crop. So many individuals from throughout the state. A lot of representation from all sorts of counties throughout the state that we don't necessarily see with many other crops. So that's exciting. But I do think, for this to really scale and be impactful, we do need to, there's an opportunity for us to really get ahead of, some of these challenges that other crops have experienced with with respect to things like viruses, plant material, clean plant material, and again, just really understanding and quantifying what is the benefit of some of these inputs like irrigation and so forth. So as Craig mentioned, one of the interesting things is that, our rainy season is kind of very different from where commercially agaves historically been grown. And so, there's going to be, an opportunity for irrigating when we have water, but there's also going to be questions of, well, what happens if we can't irrigate? And again, I think that is one of the opportunities that farmers are looking at is, there's many other crops, once you start growing them, if you can't irrigate them for many months and the conditions of the Central Valley, those crops are going to end up dying. And so, all of that investment that has been put into those crops, then, goes away. But at least for agave, they'll probably maybe not grow as fast, but hopefully they won't die.
Exactly. That's one of the kind of the questions for incoming growers is, you want your crop to survive or thrive, and we want both. And the great thing about agave is once it's established, it can survive without any irrigation at all. It won't thrive, but it will survive. Whereas the fruit orchards or whatever, they will die. And I also wanted to quickly answer Francisco's question about agave. The plant came from Mexico, would it still be a California agave? Yes, it would be. It's what's grown here. It's similar to if the rootstock for a wine grape came from France, it's the grapes that are California or Napa grapes, and that's a California wine. It's not where the rootstock came from. And same with, so we grow, some people are importing, whether it's pups, ihuelos or bobilles or seeds. But the finished, the grown plant is what qualifies.
Yeah. I'll also mention just kind of, we definitely have observational data on how well some of these selections of agaves are growing, like in Yolo County, these agaves are growing to relatively large size and mass and sugar content with a relatively small amount of water. I mean, it's really, if you start comparing that to other crops, that's amazing. And then probably the really interesting one is the grower down in the Santa Barbara area that was growing agaves adjacent to avocados, where they are having some challenges related to water access as well. But his agaves were, his family's agaves,
Enormous.
hundreds of pounds, a few hundred pounds, 200 to 400 pounds in 4.5 to 5 years.
Yes.
So and again, that was just 20 agaves, and they did benefit from like the irrigation and the nutrition applied to avocados. But it's very interesting to really understand what is the benefit of these inputs. And again, we might not always use them, depending on what the,
and it's a combination. It is a combination. We actually have higher total heat points here than we do in Jalisco, for example, in the San Joaquin and in Yolo County. We have, so the combination of sun and heat, we have more of that. Plus with irrigation and fertigation, which is irrigating with through the fertilizing through irrigation, and not everyone's doing that, but that can contribute as well to growth. So we are finding that we are growing our agaves faster to maturity, larger and sweeter than in Mexico, and based on my own experience. So we're in 5 years producing agaves the same size and greater sugar content than the ones I grew in Mexico that took 8 years. So so there is we have a lot going for us on the productivity yields side of the equation. We still have significant risk. We still could suffer a cataclysmic frost as affects other crops in California, citrus and almonds, and we don't have crop insurance the way it's subsidized by the American taxpayers through the USDA, which we would love to have at some point. Like virtually all other crops, most other crops are made available. Anyway, did I answer all the questions? I don't want to leave any questions. I think.
No, I think we're just about to wrap up. I did want to give you both an opportunity to promote your work and let us know how we can stay involved, how we can track the research. Where do we find more information on agave? Well,
we both have the council. The council has a website, which is also links to Ron's website, the California Agave Research Center. And Ron could tell, I forgot, ours is agave.org, californiaagave.org. I'll put it in the message, California. And Ron, what's yours?
Ours is agave.ucdavis.edu.
Yeah, I'll put that in the agave.ucdavis.edu. I think that's good. So that's those. There's quite a bit of information there, and you know, one of the president of our board, Stuart Wolf, has probably, in terms of individual growers, I think has the most informative website, which has if you sign up for his newsletter, you immediately get a very detailed cost report of his analysis of what it costs to grow agave from a commercial agricultural perspective of a large grower, of all the inputs and what they cost. And so, but it also has information about different varieties. It's a very informative website. So CaliforniaAgaveGrowers.com. I'm putting that in the chat.
I'll be sure to link everything in the recording notes and description when we post.
And you didn't mention, but I'll mention that the Center for Land-Based Learning has sponsored well, they're doing two things. One, they've planted an experimental crop on their 3 acres that with the help of our first agave class that was sponsored by the Center for Land-Based Learning. And that's been great. The students have really been fantastic, a group of 15. We've had different field workshops. And I know Ron, UC Davis, now when you enter the campus in front of the wine grapes at the Mondavi Food and Wine Institute, you'll see a little crop of agaves that's planted there, and hopefully they'll survive the winter and be beautiful next year.
Yes, thank you for mentioning the Center for Land-Based Learning. We are definitely working closely with y'all on agave crops. And are there any plans to do another agave class? Is this going to be like a running course?
That's up to the folks at your wonderful organization. It's not my. So. If there's interest, there probably will be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we'll continue to have symposia probably once a year.
Yeah, the grant that we got helps us put on 2 symposiums, and we're also, our grant, the council also is providing a number of regional workshops, field workshops that will be, and bilingual training materials, and and making our website bilingual because we, as I mentioned, probably. Well, our membership is reflective of the state's, so at least 1/3 of our growers are Spanish speaking, even if they do speak English as well. But we want to make sure that all our materials are available in Spanish and English. So
perfect. Keep us posted, and we're happy to share all these great resources with our community and with folks interested in agave in California. Thank you so much to our speakers and to everybody in attendance. I appreciate you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Adios.
Yeah.